Welcome to episode 87.
Hey, this is John Lee Dumas of EO Fire, and you're listening to Who Did That Voice, where we take an in-depth look at voiceovers.
Ready to take a vacay, but you just don't have the time to plan? Let the agents at 3D Travel Company pamper you and take care of all the little details. Find us at www.whodidthatvoice.co and click the Book Now button on the left-hand side. For a limited time, Who Did That Voice listeners can receive a Disney gift card for qualifying Disney and Universal trips, booked and traveled by 2017. Hurry and book today so you can travel away.
Welcome to Who Did That Voice, the show where we take an in-depth look at voiceover. And now, here's your host, Trenton Larkin.
Hey everyone, just wanted to let you know we have launched a Patreon page. You can find us at www.patreon.com/whodidthatvoice. What is Patreon, you say? Well, it's a lot like a Kickstarter or Indiegogo campaign that allows you to help support us on a monthly basis. For as little as $1 a month, you can help support the show and earn amazing perks. Help us out today and join the Who Did That Voice family in a new way. Hello everyone and welcome back to the show. Today's special guest voiced Meeko the Racoon from Pocahontas 1 and 2. Here's a clip from that character.
Come on, Meeko. Pocahontas.
Today's special guest also got to voice Zombozo, the evil circus clown for the original Ben 10 series back in 2005.
If you love clowns, then this is the place to be. You're gonna die laughing. That's a Zombozo guarantee.
Our special guest also got to voice a certain character on both an animated and a live-action series known as the Crypt Keeper from Tales from the Crypt. Here is a clip from both of those shows.
Good evening. Long time. No scare? But don't worry, boils and ghouls. Your old fiend, the Crypt Keeper, will soon fix that. Just sit back and get ready for a little terror tale, guaranteed to get the bile bubbling. I call tonight's gory story... Now, Scarewaza! Ah, yes, tonight's gory story. It's about two boys who are always skipping school. It's no joke. They cut class to feed their video game habit. A habit that was consuming them. I call it game over. Oh, hi, kiddies. I was just rustling up a sickening snack for a ghastly guest. Tonight's tale from my collection of terror tomes is about a couple of real sharpies who'll do anything for a stab at the jackpot. So, ante up, fellas. The game's about to begin.
Hey everyone, I'm so glad you joined us today for our 87th episode and our second annual Halloween special. I hope you guys all have a fun, happy, and safe Halloween 2017. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Who Did That Voice. Today on the show I have John Kassir joining me. John, thank you so very much for giving me some of your time to be on our show.
Not a problem, man. Not a problem. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, John, I have been looking forward to this for a very long time. I'm so glad we were able to finally connect. You know, the very first thing I like to do when I have a special guest on the show, especially for the first time, is to get to know a little bit about them. So tell us, John, who was Little John that grew up into the man he is today, and how did you become an actor, and more specifically a voice actor, John?
Well, let's see if I can make long story short. I was liked performing as a kid. I found that it was a good way for me to communicate. Obviously, you get a certain amount of God-given talent. Lucky for me, because I wasn't a very good student. I was dyslexic as a kid, and they didn't really know what that was back in the day.
Yeah, I understand.
So, a lot of time was spent saying that I was lazy and disruptive. Of course I was disruptive. I was trying to participate in any way that I could. That was, a little more fun than trying to read stuff off the board that I couldn't read. But there were a few teachers along the way that noticed that I had some skills in this kind of thing and gave me opportunities to, orally present stuff in class, whether it was poetry in front of the class or whatever, as early as 3rd, 4th grade. And it was at that point that I just thought I enjoyed it so much. I started doing a little more like little plays and that kind of thing. By the time I got in high school, I was full on into doing all the high school productions, including musicals. And my friend Fred Smythe and I were the guys that did the morning announcements. So we used to do, the following morning announcement brought to you by a grant from the Mobile Corporation, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so then all the special interest groups in our school, would be like, hey, we have a gymnastics tournament. We'll give you tickets if you plug our event and that kind of thing. So that was kind of like my first, I guess, voiceover work, but I never really thought of that as a career per se, just because didn't really know that there was that much of a career. Loved cartoon voices, used to imitate everything on the TV, and that kind of thing. So from high school, of course, I decided to pursue acting in college and got my degree in theater at Towson University, which was a really good theater department, still is, in only about 2.5 miles from my parents' house. So it was kind of a neat opportunity. I had other opportunities in other schools, but I just thought this was, for the time and the money and the close to home and the whole deal, this just turned out to be a great situation for me. Moved to New York right out of college to do my first off-Broadway show. I was offered an off-Broadway show through the head of the theater department where I went to school, Paul Berman. We just lost him last year. He was a great guy who came from the group theater back in the day with all the greats, and the card-carrying communists, and at least that's what they called them back then. Interesting, background in theater of the absurd, Eugene Ionesco and that kind of thing. And I think I got my first off-Broadway show. I think I got paid $175 a week, which even in the 1980s was pretty low. Had to, rent an apartment with 4 other people, and then eventually moved in with a buddy of mine from college, and we rented a crappy little apartment in Spanish Harlem.
Wow.
In between acting jobs, I desperately wanted to make my living performing somehow, whether it was singing balloonograms or street performing in front of the Metropolitan Museum, which was a good part of my money-making career throughout my years in New York. I spent wound up spending 6 years in New York, making my way and struggling, and during that time worked with a comedy group that some of my friends from college and I had started, called Animal Crackers, and that was my first, start doing sketch comedy and improv and broad characters, funny different characters, and that kind of thing. Is obviously was a good way to use my talents, and we wound up doing some tours for the U.S., performing for U.S. troops all over the world, doing our comedy, which was a blast and a way to see the world. We didn't get paid much, but it was a sort of, experience that you can't really put a price on. So that was a pretty magnificent situation. And then during my time living in New York, I was able to land a role in an off-Broadway musical called Three Guys Naked from the Waist Down. Now I know that sounds like a gay review in the Village. It wasn't the Village; it was not a gay review. It was a metaphor for how stand-up comics feel in front of the audience when it's not going well.
That's a good metaphor.
Yeah, and starred Scott Bakula as the quintessential MC, and Jerry Colker, who was a Broadway actor from Pippin and did chorus line and that kind of thing, and he co-wrote the musical with Tony winner Michael Rupert, who was the lead in the original March of the Falsettos, and won a Tony Award for Sweet Charity and that kind of thing. And Michael is also a composer and wrote the music, and Jerry wrote the script, and they went on to write another Broadway musical called Mail, which had some popularity in New York. But Jerry played the kind of angry kind of lawyer law student turned stand-up comic, and I played the guy who was just lost. Probably the most talented of the three, but the one who had the least contact with reality. He was kind of like deeper than Andy Kaufman. He was really his only touch with reality was really through his comedy. It was a great character. It was a three-guy musical. Think Dreamgirls, but with stand-up comics. The second act, we played all the agents and the reporters and the airline stewardesses taking us over and that kind of thing. And while I was doing the show, I had an agent at William Morris that brought these guys down from Star Search to see me, and this was the first year of Star Search, and they asked me to be on the show. And I was like, "What is a singer?" I go, "I'm a pretty decent singer, but I don't know if I could, compete with the likes of Sam Harris and the people who were on Star Search." The guy said, "No, we want you to come on as a stand-up comic." And I said, "Well, I'm not really a stand-up comic. I'm just playing this as a role in the show." And he says, "Well, it says here you wrote some of your stand-up material, and you can win $100,000." I'm like, "Fuck, I'll do it." I was like, "Yeah, hell yeah, I'll do it." I tell you about my stand-up routine, So I didn't really have a stand-up routine per se, other than some of the the street performing type routines and sketch comedy that I had done all those years. And some of my signature pieces were like I do the Wizard of Oz in 2.5 minutes and that kind of thing. So I started doing those on Star Search, and I kept winning, and each week, and then I'd have to come up with another bit, and because I didn't really have any jokes or stories per se, my act was based on these different characters and voices, and the idea that I was addicted to television, and my comedy was based on pop culture that we had grown up through television. And, I kept winning, wound up in the semifinals, beating Rosie O'Donnell in the semifinals, who was virtually unknown at the time, and Sinbad in the finals, who was virtually unknown at that time, and won $100,000, and immediately they're like, "Okay, you're going to be opening for Tom Jones in Vegas." And, the next thing I know, I'm like, "Oh boy, I better get my ass in the clubs and work up 20 minutes as an opening act." And soon, had to be able to come up with an hour and a half material as a headliner. So, I expanded on that act of this guy addicted to television, and it's because I did so many voices and characters in my act. That's when I started being offered some voiceover work. But my first series that I landed for HBO was their very first series was First and 10, playing the Bulgarian field goal kicker Zagreb Shkaniski. He could kick like 60-yard field goals, and that show was Delta Burke's first series. She was the owner of the team, and O.J. Simpson was the general manager on the team, and Chris Maloney, who you know from SVU, was a quarterback one season, and Jason Begay, who's on Chicago PD or whatever. I think that's the name of the show. Plays the sergeant, the police sergeant, and that show was quarterback on that show one year. I mean, a lot of people cut their teeth on that show, and it was on air for 6-7 years, that show, and shot during the summer, so I was always able to do some kind of sitcom pilot in the spring and work on First and 10, and then if the other show got picked up, I wound up on that, working that series. And, HBO one day called my agents and said, look, we know John does voices and characters and this kind of thing, and we need somebody we need him to come audition for Tales from the Crypt. And I had collected the comic books as a kid, and I'm like, oh, my God, Tales from the Crypt. I can't believe they're making this into a show. It's so great. And I went down to Kevin Yeager's studio, and Kevin Yeager, of course, is the creature maker who, and a practical effects artist who was working on the puppet. He had made Chucky and designed Freddy Krueger and all this great stuff. And so here I was like a kid in a candy store at his shop, and knowing how much this comic book meant to me as a kid. And I see these other actors and these other voiceover guys, and they're all looking at the copy, and the copy is like, be careful what you ask for. You may get it. And they're like, what the hell is this? These are terrible puns. How do you sell this stuff, And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, of course, this is great. And he loves saying this stuff. It's like Shakespeare to him,
Yeah.
So, in looking at the puppet and seeing that he had holes in his throat and rotting teeth, and he was this old cackling bag of bones, and I thought I'd give him this cackling laugh, like the Wicked Witch of the West, and having done the Wizard of Oz all those years and that kind of thing, I brought all these things to this character and started doing it for Kevin, and he was like, and he's like shaking his head, yeah. So I'm laughing, as I'm doing the jokes and the lines, I'm laughing at him. I'm laughing at the jokes because he's laughing at them, and I realized this guy could probably be one of those characters that loves laughing at his own stuff, So
Yeah.
it kind of like developed right there in front of Kevin, and he was like, "That's awesome." And the next day, he had me doing it for Joel Silver and Dick Donner, two of the biggest guys in movie making history, doing it in their office, and they offered me the job on the spot. So it was,
Wow.
that's how it worked out. Of course, then at that point, I was able to get one of the best voice agents that I've been with ever since then, DPN. They were the ICM voiceover department at the time, and now they're maybe the best in the world, and I've been with them since 1988, 89, I'm going to say, so
Goodness.
that's a lot of
Almost
years.
30 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're fantastic. Wow. And that launched my voiceover career. The voiceover career, of course, always seemed like a sideline to my acting career, but more and more over the years, I just grew to love it as much, if not more, than some of the other work that I've done. I get to play parts, certainly, that I don't get to play on camera. Because you're limited by how you physically look, or that kind of thing, or there's getting to play Deadpool as a superhero, and getting to play the Crypt Keeper, a dead guy, or getting to do Meeko the Racoon, or work on Planet of the Apes doing creature noises or voices, or doing Pete's Dragon doing the dragon. I mean, I'm not limited by whether I'm male, female, old, young, or whether I'm human or not. So it's definitely added to the longevity of my career. As I've gotten older, I have certainly still get on-camera work, but it's as you get older, there's just less parts written for you. And, of course, the other actors who are still around are good, too, because that's why they're still around. So it's competitive for the few parts, and because of that, they don't have to pay you as much because it's competitive. It's like, here, I got a couple other actors we could use for this part, so here's how much we're going to pay you, take it or leave it. So occasionally I still get in a big movie, and I still get to play something really great, and I still get to get paid really well for it, or I get to work on I hope to once again work on a series, or I love doing guest stars on series, especially playing some of the more dramatic roles. It's fun for me, having such a long background in comedy. But the voiceover work is great. It's it's some of the best people in the community. We're all really supportive to one another, and just some of the nicest people you meet in the business, and certainly some of the most talented people you meet in the business. They're underrated because people don't see them doing the job, which is kind of really the point. Creating the characters that become famous is what it's all about. And and when I think back, that a lot of that has to do with the on-camera characters that I played as well, whether it's Ralph and Reefer Madness, or Shemp and the Three Stooges, or that kind of thing, is bringing life to those characters where the actor disappears in it, and people remember the characters almost more than the actor. And it's not until the last number of years that, with social media and that kind of thing, that a lot of people even knew what I looked like for the voiceover characters that I did. They started putting the face to it, and they go, "Oh, wait a minute, that's the guy that was on First and 10." He did the voice for that. Oh my God,
Yeah.
he's the Crypt Keeper too. Oh my gosh. He's he's the one that when Charlie Adler left as Buster Bunny, played Buster Bunny. It's like, people don't think of you as one thing, and it's really kind of a cool thing. I'm really feel privileged to be part of that fraternity of great voice actors.
Absolutely. Well, John, one of the things I was curious about was, I don't remember when Tales from the Crypt came out, but the animated series, the Tales from the Crypt Keeper, came out roughly about the same time, didn't it?
I'm going to say it's probably like maybe 4 years into the show.
Okay, because I know 93 to 2000 was when the animated series ran, so I wasn't sure when the live action had come out.
Live action started, we came on the air in 1989 and ran through 96, so halfway through.
Okay,
So
great.
Halfway through, it started with the animated series. And I had been pushing for them to do a live action show for kids, with the Crypt Keeper hosting. And they were like,
should revamp it.
I know. It's all about rights. It's all about rights, and we're hoping they come back to us, so we'll see.
Yeah.
But, they were like, no, too scary for kids. Of course, they came out with Goosebumps like a year later, and they were like, ooh, maybe you were right,
Yeah, it was a prime time to strike. But, speaking of Tales from the Crypt, two of the movies I absolutely loved were the 1995 Demon Knight and the 1996... hold on. Yeah, the Bordello of Blood, which was the funeral parlor moonlighting as a vampire bordello. And those both had great cast members. I mean, in Demon Knight, we had you, of course, and then Billy Zane and Jada Pinkett Smith. And then we had, in Bordello of Blood, we had John Kassir, which is you, and then Dennis Miller and Corey Feldman as well. So a lot of amazing actors that you got to work with in those different films. And those are just two of the films, but they are my favorite. But I love the TV show as well, because you had people like Ian McGregor in them. And I mean, the list just goes on. I mean, like, you have a lot of actors that I think kind of cut their teeth on your show, Tales from the Crypt, before they really made it big in their industry. So.
Oh, yeah, especially in London. I mean, first of all, with Joel Silver, the executive producers of Tales from the Crypt were maybe some of the, if not the biggest guys in the business, some of the biggest guys in the business at that time. And some of them still are. I mean, you're talking about Joel Silver, who did all the Lethal Weapon movies and Superman and Matrix and all this. And then, of course, Richard Donner, who directed Superman and the Lethal Weapon movies and all these great films. And Robert Zemeckis was an executive producer on the show, and this was a playground for him to try out some of his effects and that kind of thing. And we know, Bob Zemeckis from Forrest Gump and Back to the Future and all the wonderful movies that he's made. Walter Hill, 48 Hours, Dreamscape, all that. And David Giler, who was producer on Alien, the original Alien, and so these were the guys that were the executive producers on the show. So they could pretty much get anybody involved if they wanted. I mean, they were spending a lot of money on the show. They really weren't making money on the show when it was originally on HBO. I still don't think they ever really made any money on it, but they had its ancillary rights, and they pimped out the Crypt Keeper for Bud Light or whatever, and that kind of thing. But ultimately, it was an expensive show to do, and they did it for the love of it, and they did it to make it as good as they could.
Yeah.
And, that was early on in the HBO's career, too, so they didn't have huge budgets to spend. They didn't have the amount of money that they spent on, Game of Thrones and that kind of thing. So, the money, the production costs fell on the producers. You hope it goes into syndication and they spend a lot of, the people, but, horror didn't really fetch large licensing fees over the years. It would now, but it's already, been on Sci-Fi and, Chiller Channel and, places where they didn't pay a lot of money because they didn't have a lot of money to play it. So, ultimately, if it came back on the air, it would be an expensive show to do, but, hopefully because of its popularity, again, you would be able to get great stars on the show and great directors and great visual artists and, the people that worked on that show were just the best in the business. The last season was the seventh season that we shot in London was kind of a surprise. It was supposed to end after the sixth season. In fact, the last episode was Oils Well That Ends Well, which was I starred in, which was kind of putting me in it, kind of like the way that they would put Alfred Hitchcock in his movies, which was a fun thing to shoot. But then, to our surprise, it was becoming popular in England, and they were like, "Hey, we want to produce a season here. We'll add to the budget and play it here." And that's when a bunch of the British actors that we all know as huge movie stars now were first coming on the scene in London, whether it was Daniel Craig or Emma Samms or Ewan McGregor or these different people, they were just starting to show up. So that was their first exposure to American television and film.
Which is super epic.
Yeah, pretty incredible. William Sattler, of course, was involved in not only the first episode aired, but he was also involved in Demon Knight, and that's Demon Knight's still, I think, one of my top favorite horror movies ever. It's just Ernest Dickerson did an amazing job with that movie.
It was fantastic. Well, speaking of something more recently that you've been a part of, I believe you were a part of War for the Planet of the Apes. Is that correct?
That's correct. I was honored to be brought on to join a group of really talented guys that you've probably never heard of most of them, and we just came in and filled in all the other apes that didn't have voices. There was
that's awesome.
There's a handful of actors that that are the main roles in the movie, and then all the other ones are either they're all added in later through. The CGI on that film is incredible. You can't tell what's live action and what's computer generated. You just can't tell.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
The first one blew me away, but each one has gotten better and better. Now you really, you look at the orangutan's face or you look at Caesar's face and you look at it and you go, wow, I cannot tell that that's computer generated. Not even on a huge screen in 3D or 4D or whatever they're calling it these days. You cannot tell. And so we had the luxury of going in and, some of the stuff was finished. Some of it's you're looking at an actor with spots on his face, which I've done motion capture before. It's a really involved process and, difficult to act in. And these guys did an amazing job. But adding, ape voices to the movie, it wasn't, as much of a lead role as what I get to do in some other movies, but it took every bit of my skill and every bit of it was a lot of sessions of hard vocal work to get it done. But what a great movie! It's when you get even when you do a small part on a great movie, it's such a fun thing. I got to spend 4 months doing CGI on Jack the Giant Slayer with Bryan Singer directing, and awesome. So I got to spend 4 months in London on their dime, which London's an expensive city. It's really really fun to hang there. They put you up in a great apartment, and and they're paying you and giving you a per diem and the whole deal to hang out and have a lot of free time on top of it. But the real joy of that was getting to play a two-headed giant with British actor Bill Nye, who from Love Actually and Underworld and all these great, playing what was Davy Jones, the squid face, but we had an amazing time working together. He was a really generous actor to work with, and of course we're playing opposite Ewan McGregor and Stanley Tucci and Nicholas Hoult and Ian McShane, and these great these great actors, and meanwhile we're in these ridiculous PVC suits with the spots all over our face and stuff. And Bill would walk and talk as his character, and I would have to mirror everything he did physically, and then act differently with my head and my arm and my voice. So it was really kind of a bizarre way to work, but you learn a lot doing that kind of thing when you see what goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah, I've heard of. Sorry, I'm go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, as a voice actor, you get to see a lot of things that go on behind the scenes, which is really kind of cool because it's a collaborative art. So, sometimes we get to see what our characters are going to look like when we do voices, and sometimes we don't. So sometimes we're like, really, you're like so pleasantly surprised when you see what they do, and sometimes you're like, really, that if I knew he looked like that, I would have done it different.
Yeah, if you had a visual in your head to kind of go with it, but
right.
Well. Some other stuff you've done kind of in the past, I believe you were a part of Team Knight Rider as PLATO. Is that correct?
I was. Yeah. That was a lot of fun.
Epic show.
Yeah, it was weird because you're trying to make him feel like a character, but at the same time, every voice he does is different because it's all like he was meant to be a character that only all his references were television shows. So he
kind of sounds like your comedy routine.
It very much was, and I think that's probably why they thought of me. And because I didn't even audition for it, they just called me and said, we got this character that we think you'd be perfect for, and here's why.
That's awesome.
It was a lot of fun to do. I love that kind of thing. It's when you've developed as a dyslexic kid, and I'll just close with this, but. As a dyslexic kid, finding a voice for yourself to be able to entertain or to create, fantasy through voices and characters and physicality. And, I even worked as a pantomime on the street, as I told you, for the Metropolitan Museum kind of thing. To have an opportunity to use those talents, having developed them from the time I was a little kid, is amazing. And most parts that I get cast in, especially now, are pretty much me, whether I'm a psychiatrist or or a sleazy agent or whatever I'm playing. There's, I'm portraying me being that, which is great, and it's a good way to work, and it's great working with other actors. But when you get to really stretch and play things that are completely out of the fantasy of your head and created out of the fantasy of these writers and visual artists, that's a whole nother thing. Doing the vocals for Pete's Dragon was probably one of the more difficult things I've ever had to do to emote emotion through all those sounds and reactions. But then to see it put brilliantly by these incredible visual artists, and then for it to be put into a beautiful film, I think that's one of the best films I've ever been in. And it's, sadly, some of those films don't get the same attention as as some of the other great movies they get to do, like whether it's all the stuff for Illumination that I work on or Disney animation. To work on that film, I think that it was a really, really beautiful film.
Absolutely, John. Well, I have one final question for you, and we will wrap this up. I know your time is precious. The question is, what is the legacy that you want to leave behind?
Oh, boy. That's tough because, obviously, as an actor, after winning Star Search and that kind of thing, you have the ability to exploit becoming famous, becoming a famous person. And, I thought that I had always wanted that. I liked the attention as a kid. It was validation for what you do and that kind of thing. But ultimately, I just kind of found along the way that the more power I gave for people to give me that kind of attention, it gave them also the power to take it all away. And it really wasn't it wasn't what I found. What gave me the joy out of what I was doing. What gave me the joy was working. Obviously, the more famous you are, the more opportunity you have to work. And I certainly know the need for that and doing the social media and that kind of stuff. But ultimately, I just want people to remember the characters and be associated with great, performance art, whether it's great movies, great theater, great television, just great characters. In terms of my work, that's what I would want my legacy to be. In terms of my life, the relationships and the friendships that I've built over the years, whether they're in the business or not, reflect of more who I am than anything else. And I'm grateful to have a lovely wife and live in a nice house and have my dogs and grow up with a large family and loving parents who are still alive. My dad just turned 93. Wow. And my mom's 87 years old, but sadly she has Alzheimer's, but she's still in good spirits and knows who most of us are and that kind of thing. But it's, a legacy that you'd like to leave is that, you made a difference in those people's lives. And at the same time, if you were a part of some really great projects that changed other people's lives, that's cool too. So, those are the things that you like to leave behind.
Absolutely, John. I think it's a wonderful legacy that you want to leave behind. And I think you've created such an amazing past with all the wonderful characters, including Meeko from Pocahontas. You briefly mentioned that, and Deadpool from video games. And I mean, you've just done so many crazy cool things like Zombozo, the clown, who was the ringleader from Ben 10. And I believe you were even the Ice King from Adventure Time.
The original Ice King, which in the short film that launched the series, and originally they had thought to have me as the Ice King through the series, but I think they probably realized they were marketing it to younger kids or something. I think they got the idea that my version of him might be a little too scary. I probably could have toned him down for him, but they didn't really give me a chance. But that's okay. There's always work to go around. You go and you do stuff, you don't know what's going to happen to it. Absolutely. It's like it wasn't until social media I realized how popular, Ray Rocket was. Yeah. I had no idea, here he was, this great, dad, a surfer dude, and there were kids that related to him as a single parent and just think he's the coolest guy ever. And I'm just Absolutely. Like, this is so cool to find this out,
Well, John, it has been an absolute honor and pleasure having you on the show today. Would you give us a special closeout as we are celebrating Halloween 2017?
Sure. All right, kiddies. Hope you're enjoying my favorite horror day. Happy Halloween.
This is John Kassir on Who Did That Voice?
Well, it was me, of course.
Well, everyone, I sure hope you enjoyed today's episode with John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper. And if you did, please find me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram by searching Who Did That Voice. I would love to hear from you. A question you might ask yourself is, where can I listen to Who Did That Voice? That's an excellent question. You can hear us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, TuneIn Radio, YouTube, and our website at www.whodidthatvoice.co. Click the Episodes tab and listen away. Well, everyone, that's all the time we have for this episode. Join us this Friday for our next special guest, Andy Field, the voice of Hand Unit from Five Nights at Freddy's sister location. You won't want to miss this episode. Hey, do you ask yourself who did that voice? Well, if you do, go to our website, www.whodidthatvoice.co, and click on the Episodes tab. Choose an actor, pick their name, and see pictures from the different characters they've voiced in their career.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next time for more discoveries on Who Did That Voice.